Lawson, you missed out on the introduction portion of the class where we all got to know one another. So naturally, I want you to introduce yourself to the class. So tell the class what your name is. Of course, I already mentioned your name, but you can say once again where you're from, why you decided to get a real estate license, and how you heard about Cameron Academy. The floor is yours.
My name is Lahsan Ilamrani.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Morocco.
What part? Fez, Casablanca.
I'm from Fez.
Oh, okay, cool.
So, apart from administrative business, from my girlfriend there, because he's a broker in Cameron.
Is he a broker?
Yes.
Okay, you gave the quotations. I didn't know if you were her. Uh-huh.
I was really good in sales stuff and doing that. And
Naturally.
yeah,
Most of my friends that are Moroccan, yes, they're amazing at sales. Yeah.
only like Moroccan people.
Yeah.
So, they're really good in real estate business.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I heard from Cameron Academy from
Yes.
Morocco.
Awesome. I have a question for you. Random question, but I always ask my Moroccan students and friends as well. How many languages do you speak?
Well, I speak 5.
5 languages. There you go. Can I guess? Arabic, French, English, Spanish, Portuguese.
Well, I'm not speaking. So French, yes.
French,
English,
English,
Germany.
German.
I'm not speaking Spanish because in high school you have to choose between English or Spanish. So I chose English.
Okay, good for you. We're doing something wrong in the States. I mean, if you can learn 5 languages while in grade school, right?
Sorry.
While you're in grade school,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I mean, I feel like,
It used to be like when I was had to take a course.
yes,
And then I think they did it all.
when I was in high school, it was the same thing as well. But you can, you know,
In college, I could take
not take it serious.
one.
I took Spanish. You speak, oh, you took French, but you speak it?
Understand it more than I can speak it.
Okay. Yes.
It's just
Well, you can practice with your fellow classmate now. And Haiti, Creole French. Awesome. Do you?
I do.
Oh my gosh. Do you speak it in the house? But she's gonna blame you because
No,
it's mama's house. So you did.
but she just didn't. I don't know. She just didn't pick it up because I told her nobody ever taught me. I just learned it because
Yeah.
I was around it. And she's like, no, you needed to teach me or whatever, because I
They
thought
didn't
she would
speak to
just
me.
pick it
She
up.
everyone would speak to me in English. It was like Creole was like the secret language.
Got you. So you can say things without the kids understanding, adult talk, reconnect with some family members, only speak French and Creole. Got you. Listen, kids are stubborn. I have 2 little ones. My wife speaks Spanish, that's her primary language, and the kids don't speak Spanish. I mean, they prefer to speak in English. No, well, my wife, she finds it easier to communicate in English, even though Spanish is her primary language, just because it's easier to get things through to the kids because she doesn't want to repeat herself and so forth. But I think she should speak Spanish all the time. Even if I don't understand, I'm okay with that because speaking multiple languages unlocks a certain part of your brain, I believe. We're talking about psychology and kids and so forth and mental development and all that stuff. But that's amazing. 5 languages. God bless you. I want to swap brains with you right now. In another life. We have some comments here. Hello, hello. Yes. Hi. Good evening, everybody. Second day of school. And you had some homework last night, with exception of Lawson. So you're just going to have to follow along. But I want you to take out your review questions for Unit 1, page 13. And we're going to go through this together. Sound good? Y'all ready? Let's jump into it. Sorry you guys had to sit separately today. Just give the side eye, you know? All right.
Oh, yeah, no, you're good. Okay, one more time.
That's a good attitude. I like that. All right. So let's open up our textbook to page 13. Everyone has a name tag, and you set that name tag in front of you so we can call you out. Is it Iman?
Yeah.
Iman. Okay. Andrea? Yes. And then we have Michaela. And we have Melissa. We have Christine. We have Lawson.
We have Joe.
All right, Joe. We have Joe. Friendly neighborhood realtor. Okay, and we have Elijah. Thank you. All right, cool. And Darlene. Perfect. And those of us that are joining online, I'll get to you guys as well. Everybody will get a chance to read out a question, and you will share what you got as your answer. So we will expect an answer from all of you. And you don't want an awkward moment between you and I because you didn't have this ready. But who would like to volunteer before I start calling on people? Andrea, looks like you half rose your hand. Go ahead. Question number 1. Read out the question and then read out what you got as your answer. Go ahead, read it out.
All realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
Longest answer it is B as in Bravo. Good job. Because remember, a real estate licensee is not a realtor. So we have to understand the difference between being a licensed real estate agent and being a realtor. Once you get your license, you're a licensed sales associate. But you have to join this trade organization, largest trade organization on the planet, called the NAR, in order to call yourself a realtor. Go ahead, Christine.
Follow refers to B, what a sale associate does for buyers and sellers after the sale.
Yes, keywords after the sale. And what is follow-up good for? What's the benefits of that when you follow up with your buyers and sellers after the sale? Yeah. Future referrals, leads, yes. Word of mouth, advertising, reputation, all of the above. Good job. Who would like to read out the next? Go ahead, Melissa.
Certain exceptions apply. An active real estate licensee is legally entitled to appraise real property for compensation concerning a non-federal related transaction. I have A.
Go ahead, read it out.
As long as she does not represent herself as a state certified or licensed appraiser and complies with the USPAP.
A is an alpha, longest answer. Good job. And the answer itself is the explanation. Any questions about this? All right, who would like to read out the next? Go ahead. Yes. C is in Charlie. Michaela, that is correct. Because so many owners are choosing to be absent because they're not going to live in it, they're using it for investment purposes. There's a demand for property managers because maybe they don't have the expertise or time to take care of it themselves. Okay, who would like to go next? Darlene.
State licensees must comply with the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, USPAP, when conducting which value estimate for the appraisal.
Yes, it's A as an alpha. Good job. Because CMAs, BPOs, you do not have to comply with the USPAP, the standards of professional appraisal practices. Okay, Iman. Go ahead and read it out. Yes, that's correct. A is an alpha. Also, is it the longest answer? It is. So there's a trend, as we can see, with the majority of the correct answers. Hey. So if I said, why is it a conflict to receive a commission off of providing an estimate of value? If the amount you receive is based on what you evaluate the property as. If I said, hey, listen, if I give you, I'm going to give you a percentage based on what you think the property is worth. How much is the property worth? $1 billion. Exactly. So that's why it's a conflict of interest. Good job, Elijah. Yep.
The 5 major sales specialties do not include Bravo special use.
Yeah. B as in Bravo. Good job. Special use. Melissa?
An owner of a Florida property has decided to hire someone to handle the property's leasing management, marketing, and maintenance. This person is someone in B property.
Oh, I see why you volunteered for that one. That's an easy one, right? Property management is correct. We can't miss that one. All right, online, if I can get some participants here. Go ahead, Andre. You can turn on your
Which
mic.
type of construction involves building to a buyer's specification? Custom homes.
Yeah. I'm glad you didn't get tripped up by letter B and think that spec was short for specifications. No, it's short for speculative. So correct answer is C as in Charlie. Custom homes. To the buyer's specifications, just the way, they like it. All right, number 10. Dominique. Go ahead, Dominique. You can turn on
Sorry,
your
I was having a
microphone.
hard time getting my mic off of mute.
No problem.
The term dedication as it applies to development and construction refers to a gift of land by the owner to the local government for public use.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, what's the most common example of this that we described yesterday?
Building or now gifting roads.
Yes, exactly. The streets within. Because a developer doesn't want to have the obligation of maintaining those roads. They dedicate, give it away. Excuse me. All right. Hubert. Number 11.
All right. So what type of license is required to sell or lease business opportunities for another person? The answer is C, real estate license.
Yes, good job. Okay, it's a common mistake to select A or B. Mistake. But remember, there's no such thing as a business broker license or a business opportunity broker license. Remember, all you need is your real estate license to help people buy, sell, lease businesses. Now, if you do specialize in buying, selling, leasing businesses, they simply refer to you as, they call you a business broker, but that's not a separate license. All you need is that real estate license. Good job. I'm glad you didn't get tripped up by that. And we're going to move on to Shirley. Go ahead, Shirley.
Selecting a limited geographical area in which a real estate professional develops special expertise. C, farming.
Yeah, farming or having a farm area. That's correct. Good job. Any questions here? All right. C as in Charlie. All right, Susie, number 13.
Okay, managing which type of property of more than 10 units requires a CAM license? I said A, apartment building. This
Correct
was
answer. It's a good guess, but it's actually D as in Delta, condominium complex.
okay.
So
See, this is the one
Go
I
back
was
to that section.
on.
Yeah, if you go back to that section where it talks about needing a CAM license for what types of properties, you'll
Okay.
see it. You'll see the list. So for apartment buildings, or commercial properties, business complex, you don't necessarily need a CAM license. But for condo complexes, homeowners associations, communities of homes on that list that we described earlier and yesterday as well, that's when you would need that license.
Gotcha.
And they also describe you needing the community needing a proposed budget of at least $100,000. You might have seen that within as well. But since we're done with everybody participating here, I'm going to take over for these remaining questions. If you have any concerns, do not hesitate to ask and we'll discuss it. Number 14, effective advertising involving developing a database of prospects to direct a specific message is called, what'd you get? Target marketing. C as in Charlie. Good job. Any questions? The answer, well, the question basically gives it away. 15, a broker charges a prospective seller $50 for a CMA. Which statement applies? It's B as in Bravo. It's permissible provided the broker does not represent the CMA as an appraisal. All right, that wraps up Unit 1. Let's move on to Unit 2 questions. And we're on page 41, question 1. A licensed sales associate may operate. It's B as in Bravo, which is more accurate, more precise, for the broker registered. So how they use this terminology, registered, registration is accurate as a sales associate's employer, because registration is the process of submitting information to the beeper. And A is not accurate as to how they use that terminology. Number 2, an associate applicant is not required to comply with which requirement? It's C. Must you be a resident of Florida to obtain a Florida real estate license? No, you can live anywhere. Nor do you have to be a citizen. We'll have a question about that. Number 3, which person does not meet the experience requirements to obtain a Florida broker's license? It is D as in Delta, an applicant who has held an active Florida sales associate license during 2 of the preceding 5 years while employed by an owner developer. That's the deal breaker right there, because the time period is accurate. You have to have 2 years experience within a 5-year time period, but you have to be active with a what? A broker to become a broker yourself. You can't earn experience by hanging your license with an owner developer. That's why this person does not meet the experience requirements. Like a major home builder or a timeshare resort. What information appears on the face of the real estate license? Yeah, easy one. C as in Charlie, license number. Number 5. An associate applicant is not required to disclose which information on the license application? B, proof of U.S. citizenship. But you need what number? And for what reason? For child support obligations. What other reason do you need a social in our country? 6, a real estate sales associate who works on a commission basis for 2 separate brokerage companies. What's true? Yeah, it's A as in Alpha. Remember, just like Andrea asks, she said, can you hang your license with 2 separate brokerage companies at the same time simultaneously? No, that is unacceptable. It's prohibited. You can have only one registered employer at any given time. Now, we did mention that if you hang your license with one brokerage company and you're salaried with an owner developer, technically there's no violation of law, but it will probably be a violation of company policy. 7, what is the Latin term for a plea of no loca? Okay. D is in Delta. 8, John is an act. Okay. Tell me what you got for 8. Correct answer is actually C as in Charlie. License through endorsement. And this is the following requirements. C as in Charlie. Okay, 9. Which event may cause a FREC to refuse to certify an individual as qualified for licensure? B as in Bravo. Keyword convicted of fraud. Huge red flag. In an insurance scam, so scamming people out of money. 10, and was convicted for it. That's the key. 10, an applicant has held a real estate license in good standing in another state since 2019. The applicant is licensed in a state that has mutual recognition with Florida. 5 months ago, they moved to Orlando. Is this licensee eligible to apply for a Florida real estate license under mutual recognition? No. Correct answer is A, because they're considered to be a what? Yeah, they moved to Orlando, Florida. How many months ago? 5. Is that more than 4? So are they a resident? Therefore, they must do everything residents do in order to get the license, what you're going through right now. Number 11, a woman received her Florida sales associate license last year. Which requirement must she complete to become a licensed real estate broker? A, has to have at least completed that first renewal, the most important renewal, the 45-hour post, prior to the expiration date of that initial license. If you're late by 1 day, you lose your license. Have to start from scratch. So what's the recommendation? As soon as you pass the state exam, do the 45-hour class. Knock it out. 12, a man has a North Carolina broker's license. He's not licensed in Florida, but he sells a parcel of land he owns in Florida. Assuming all else is proper, this is a legal transaction because? Correct answer is B as in Bravo, yeah. Florida law exempts from licensure individuals who are selling their own property. For sale by owner, right? Even for rent or for lease by owner. 13, a sales associate applicant who has submitted a correctly completed application for the state license examination and who successfully passes the state exam may legally begin to operate as a licensee when the D, probably the most accurate answer you're going to find. Applicant is notified of having passed the state exam, filed the appropriate form to become registered as active with DeBeeper, and DeBeeper's website reflects their active status. 14, if the post-license, we just mentioned this, post-licensing requirement is not fulfilled before the first renewal, an associate licensee, if they wish to continue in the real estate business, what do they have to do? It's B as in Bravo, requalify as if they've never had a license, because it's the first renewal, the most important. If they're late by 1 day, null and void, have to requalify. So all 5 steps, application, fingerprints out the window. 15, services of real estate do not include? Yeah, C as in Charlie, selling cemetery lots because they're not considered to be real property, nor is renting mobile home lots. 16, which statement best describes who must be licensed to practice real estate in Florida? Longest answer is D as in Delta. Anyone who performs real estate services for another person for compensation of any type, unless specifically exempted by law. And what are the 8 services of real estate? Well, it's the acronym A, bar, sale. Advertising, buying, appraising, renting, selling, auctioning, leasing, and exchanging. 17, which individual is not exempt from licensure under Florida Statute 475? Now let's unpack this. Look up here. If you're exempt from licensure, what does that mean? You're required or you're not required? You're not required if you're exempt from licensure. So what does not exempt mean? Why don't they just say that, right? Which individual is required? It's silly. So for that reason, who needs a license? It's D, yeah. Because you're receiving a salary plus bonuses, and to receive anything based on the transaction requires having a real estate what? License. This is the rule. 18, a salaried individual manages a condo building, rents units for 3-month or 6-month periods. The manager is exempt. He is in Delta from licensure under Florida Statute 475. 19, the developer purchased attractive land, subdivided the property into individual lots. The developer hired his son, who's not licensed to sell the lots. Okay, a little nepo baby, nepotism there. The father agreed to pay his son a salary of $200 per week. Wow, thanks, Dad. After 2 weeks, his son had only sold 2 lots, so the father decided to add an incentive. The father promised his son that after every 5th lot was sold, he would give his son a lot free and clear. That is one hell of an incentive, right? Wish I had a daddy like that. Sounds like a different type of daddy, yeah? After 1 more week, the son had only sold 1 more lot. I guess the son is just not good at sales, obviously. So the son quits his job to work for another developer who pays a higher weekly salary. Which statement applies to this arrangement? It's D as in Delta. Both are in violation because of the promise of the incentive. You remember? The promise of being paid is the same as being paid, even if you don't get paid. So even though the son didn't perform, the promise was already given and received, right? And the son did not have a license, so he can't even receive that promise because it's the same as receiving compensation. 20, FBI files reveal that 6 months ago, a man worked as a broker in Georgia where he was charged with arson. What's arson? Burning property related to a large insurance claim. So that means burning property for what? Money. If somebody was caught by the FBI for burning property in exchange to try to get money, insurance fraud, right? Do you think they should be working in the housing industry, buying, selling properties and so forth? Probably not, but it's not up to us to decide. Who gets to decide? After submitting the application, it's the FREC. And the correct answer is A as in Alpha. Can use their discretion to determine if they're qualified or not. And they might even ask them to come in for a hearing, an interview. Any questions about this? All right, how you guys feel? Good? It's good to review, right? And this is how things are going to progress. You got to challenge yourself every single night. That's why, otherwise you won't get the benefit of these questions and the benefit of this review. And you're only getting 1/3 of the benefit of taking this class and the investment that you made on yourself. So let's jump into our session for today. We're making good time, and then we'll take a break at 6. Sound good? All right. And it's going to be units 3 and 4 today. We're going to start with unit 4. Yes, question. Yes, that would be a good thing for me to provide to you. Let me do that right now. I'm going to start with 4. Sprint. Swing. Okay, and make sure it goes to the right. Yep. And let's get one copy of that bad boy. All right, that's going to start printing. And then you can grab those copies from that printer. All right. Unit 4, let me just give you a quick introduction while we're getting those handouts printed for you. Unit 4 is all about the relationships that exist in our business. Okay, relationships between buyers, sellers, owners, renters, relationship between you and your brokerage company. All these relationships are going to be described. And the rules within those relationships, the dynamic of these relationships, the procedures you have to follow when you're maintaining these relationships. So that is all relevant, including how to get into the relationship and eventually how to get out, terminate the relationship. All of that is going to be discussed. So we're actually going to begin on page 66. You can start grabbing those. Grab the first few sheets for now so you can follow along. All right, on page 66. To set the tone, let's discuss what's in front of us. Law of agency. Let me read this out to you, specifically on line 2. It says, when a person delegates authority to another in our business, when the action of somebody doing this creates something. You'll see it right here. Creates an agency what? Line 2, an agency what? What's created? Agency relationship. So as soon as somebody delegates authority to another in our business, an agency relationship has been created. Do you follow so far? Agency relationships fall within the body of law called the law of agency. There are 3 types of law we should be familiar with just moving forward. General knowledge. The first is what? Common law. And I'm going to simplify this for you so we don't have to read through the entirety of this. Common law, write this down. Common law is common sense law, guys. It's just the difference between right and what? Ethical versus unethical. That's it. It's assumed by we as a people. That's common law. But then we come across, starts with S, statutory law. Write this down. Anytime you see statutory law, what is it referring to? State law. Like chapter 475, that's a state law. Florida real estate license law, specifically for Florida, right? It's a law in our state. We talked about chapter 475 of the Florida statutes being created in 1923 yesterday, right? And then we have what type of law? Administrative. Anytime moving forward in your textbook, if you see that word administrative, write this down. It means license. The word administrative, associate that word with license. Administrative law, license law. So what's a license law? Chapter 475 of the Florida, yeah, exactly, that's correct. Chapter 475 of the Florida statutes, Florida real estate license law, correct? So not only is it a state law, but it's also a license law. Are you following? It's both. Are you with me? Okay. Let's move on. So just a moment ago, we said the action of somebody delegating authority to another in our business creates an agency relationship. Do you remember that? Okay, but the actual person that's doing that, look on line 23. The person that's delegating the authority has a name. In our business, they're called the what? Yep. And the person who is receiving that responsibility is called the what? The agent. Bingo. So the first relationship that we're going to encounter and what we're going to discuss is a relationship that exists between a principal and there we go. So what's an example of this? They give you an example on line 27. The relationship between an associate and the employing broker. Do you see that? Is an example. So the broker is delegating authority. So they are the what? Principal. And you as the associate are classified as the what? The agent. Now, when it comes to a principal-agent relationship, there's another relationship that exists within. It's a relationship within a relationship, okay? And it's specifically on line 33. It's an odd word, starts with F. It's called what? Yes. So the relationship between a principal and agent, because of this delegation and this assumption of responsibility, creates a fiduciary relationship between these two parties. What does fiduciary mean? Look, I'm going to highlight it. Line 34, it means what with one another? Trust, confidence with one another. We use a term to describe this. But I like on line 35, starts with an A. This terminology helps you out just a little bit more. Alliance or allegiance. Imagine countries that have alliances with one another, right? Are they looking out for each other's best interests? Are they dealing in trust and confidence with one another? That's what we're describing here. This is what exists in a fiduciary relationship. And that's what you'll see when you have principal and agent. Are you with me so far? I'm building upon. What's the term or the phrase that we use to describe this? Well, actually, I'm sorry. I showed you allegiance. But let's talk about an example of relationship in our business that we should be familiar with. Absolutely, because it's so common. What about the relationship between a seller and a buyer in a typical real estate transaction? Do you think buyers and sellers are dealing in trust and confidence with one another in the transaction? Yes or no? Absolutely not. Because buyers and sellers don't have the same objective within the transaction. Yes, they both want to get the property transferred, right? But they're at odds because the seller wants the what? Most money possible. The buyer wants to get the what? Cheapest price they can, wants to get a bargain. So for this reason, they cannot have a fiduciary relationship. They have adverse or opposite interests, correct? So we use a phrase to describe that when they're at odds. A relationship where they're at odds. They're dealing at what with one another? Yep. Highlight this, line 37. That means stay at least an arm's length away from me because I don't trust you. I need to keep my eyes on you because we don't have the same goal in the transaction. Does that make sense? So that's not a fiduciary. On page 67, there's a Latin phrase that we use to describe this as well that you could be tested on. I saw it on my state exam. Caveat emptor. Caveat emptor, which translates to let the buyer beware. Not Harry Potter, okay? Not casting a spell here. So caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And it makes sense because as a buyer, you have to be aware. Be on guard because you're not going to trust the seller. They have a different goal than you and what you're trying to accomplish in the transaction. Okay, now let's go back to principal and agent once again. Principal is a party delegating authority. Agent is a party assuming that responsibility to have trust, alliance with one another. Do you remember this? I'm just reviewing. So let's go back to that and understand that there are two types of agents in existence in our business. And look up here real quick. Depending on how much authority is given to you by the principal will dictate what type of agent you are. Either one of these two, general or what? Special. So let's talk about the difference. General means, and you can highlight this, write this down though. It means you're responsible for some duties. Write that down. Some duties. Okay, so what's an example of when you might be a general agent working with a principal? One example could be when you're providing property management services. As a property manager, you'll be classified as a general agent. Why? Because you're not responsible for all duties on behalf of the principal, in this case, the property owner. You have some responsibility, such as leasing, managing, marketing, maintenance. You're not going to pay property taxes for them. You're not going to handle legal matters that arise against the property unless you're directly responsible for it, right? So some, not all, not one, but some. And another example of this is a relationship between the employing broker and their associates. So when you decide to hang your license with an employing brokerage company, the broker is going to be the principal. You're going to be the agent, but you would be classified as a what type of agent? Starts with the G. General, because you're going to be responsible for how many duties? Some, not all, not one, but some. Are you with me on this? Okay. So are you going to pay for rent for that brokerage company? No. Okay. Even though your commissions will contribute towards paying the rent, but you understand what I'm saying. You're not directly responsible for it. You're responsible for some duties, the procedures that you have to follow operating within that brokerage office. Okay. Whatever standards that brokerage company has, dealing with buyers, sellers, contracts, record keeping, and so forth. And all things that we're going to discuss in the future. Are you with me so far? And then we come across something referred to as a special agent. And special agents are responsible for one specific act. So write this down. They have one duty. One duty that they're responsible for on behalf of a principal. One example of this could be a brokerage company enters into an agreement with a seller to represent the seller in negotiations to find a buyer for the seller's property. And that's their only task and nothing beyond that. So one specific duty. There's several other examples, but that's all you need to know for now. Are you guys with me so far? Any questions on this? All right, let's continue. Let's talk about what I really wanted to get to in this unit, brokerage relationships in Florida, but it's actually on page 68. Here's the three relationships we're going to discuss. And this topic is going to make up the majority of this unit. By understanding these three relationships, you're going to be in good shape for exam purposes when you're tested on this unit specifically. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go through each one. And the best way to attack it, by the way, highlight this on page 69, class exam question. Man, my phone is blowing up right now. I must be special. Okay, hello, sir. Wasn't able to make it there to the property today. We'll have you a quote tomorrow morning. I don't even know who that is. I'm a buyer. I was calling about a property. What are the terms for seller financing? That's the business. So as I mentioned, the best way to attack and understand these three relationships is to focus on specifically figure 4.1. This is on the same page, page 69. We're going to go through each one of these relationships. As I mentioned earlier, you highlighted them, and here they are. No brokerage, transaction broker, single agency. But to the left, you see the duties that you're obligated to depending on the relationship you select. So depending on the relationship you have with that party will dictate the duties that you owe them. Are you with me? I think that's your cell phone, somebody's cell phone? Okay. All right, so check this out. Let's start with the no brokerage relationship. Now, this one always throws somebody through a loop. What is a no brokerage relationship? Well, you have to unpack what broker means specifically. The word broker means to facilitate. You're facilitating something between two parties. Like a stockbroker. You're facilitating between somebody who wants stock in a company and the company who's selling their stock. And just like you're a real estate agent, you're soon to be a real estate agent, you're going to be brokering, right? Between two parties, the owner of the property and a prospective buyer, for instance, something like that. And with specific licenses, you have the opportunity to make commissions off of these facilitating transactions. Anyhow, so what does it mean to be a no broker then? If the word broker means to facilitate, what is no broker? It means you're not facilitating. You're not involved with negotiations between the parties. That's why this relationship is unique from the rest. And I want you to write down some features as to what this relationship is all about. And I'll even give you an example of when you might choose this relationship in your business. So as a no broker, first of all, there's no representation in this relationship. No representation. You're not facilitating, which means there's no negotiation. You're simply just taking care, I'm writing it down, of the what within the transaction, the paperwork. In other words, the contracts used to solidify the deal. So when most likely would you be hired as a no broker just to take care of the paperwork, the contracts within the transaction? You could write this down as well. It's mainly when you're dealing with a FSBO seller. If you remember yesterday, we talked about what FSBO means, not Fizbo the clown or a frisbee. But FSBO is an acronym. It stands for what? For sale by owner. So a FSBO seller, you've seen those signs before, right? For sale by owner in somebody's front yard. Okay. The sign itself, the name for sale by owner, is telling you they don't want you to represent them. It's for sale by the owner. I'm good. I'll look for the buyer and I'll negotiate myself as to what I think a good price is for my home. But once I find this buyer and we agree to a price, I might not know what to do next. So they might hire you to come into the transaction and take care of what specifically and only? The paperwork. It's the paperwork relationship. So you can imagine when this relationship would be selected. There's one other example of it. I'm going to wait to share that last example, but mainly it's when you're dealing with FSBOs, for sale by owners. Any questions about this? If this relationship is selected based on the circumstance, then you would owe 3 duties to that individual you're working with, that you have this relationship with. And to help you recall, think of the acronym ADD. Do you see the 3? And if you'll notice, all 3 are consistent across the board for those 3 relationships that we're going to discuss. Let's go through each one so we can better understand the duties. The first one is accounting for all what? Yeah. Maintaining any money that's received within the transaction, being responsible for those funds, accountable for those funds. What's the only money you can possibly see and be responsible for throughout the duration of the transaction prior to the closing? Yeah, exactly. We might call it the EMD, the earnest money deposit, or just the deposit that the buyer gives when their offer is accepted. Have you heard of this before? Usually they're contractually obligated to give this if they want to proceed with the transaction. It's a placeholder, and it's going to be credited to them towards the purchase price at the closing date. But that's probably the only money you're going to be seeing and be responsible for within the transaction. We'll talk about in a later unit tomorrow how you account for these funds, what are the procedures in handling this money, but all that's described here is just being accountable for that money. We'll see the details of that further tomorrow. For now, let's move on. The next one goes without saying. It doesn't need any further elaboration. Deal honestly in what? Yeah. But the next one does need additional explanation. Disclose all known facts that affect the value of residential property. I want you to add this. What they're describing here is material, latent, which means hidden, defects. Okay. So let me unpack this so you can better understand. anything you know about the property that can materially affect the value, physical problems in the property, not title defects, not a lien against the property, talking about physical problems, no matter how small. If the buyer cannot see it for themselves, it's your duty to do what? Disclose. This is the rule. This is your obligation. This duty is consistent on all three relationships that we're going to describe. So what's an example of this? Let's just imagine there's a big hole in the wall. Your buyer walks past this hole in the wall, doesn't say anything. Must you mention that to them, disclose to them, hey, by the way, there's a hole in the wall? Must you reveal that to them? The answer is no, because you're disclosing hidden, latent defects, something that the buyer cannot see for themselves. So if it's out in the open, you do not have to disclose. Take responsibility for disclosure, but let's change that circumstance and then you answer accordingly. That hole is now covered by a painting and you know the hole exists behind that painting. Must you disclose now? Yes. Okay, perfect. And there are certain things that are not so obvious that we should discuss. And I get questions about this from time to time. What about the previous owner was a drug dealer? It was a crack house, a trap house, something like this. Is that something that would have to be disclosed to the prospective buyer? Would that be a deal breaker for you if you're going to purchase that property, if you found out it was previously used for drug distribution or something like this? Would it jeopardize whether or not you buy it? Well, for that reason, do real estate agents need to disclose this to the prospective buyer? Federal law says it's not relevant and therefore does not have to be disclosed. Federal law, not just Florida. I'll answer your question in just a moment. I have a feeling I know what you're going to ask. So, any illegal activity associated with the property, it's not material and does not have to be disclosed. But I do get the other question about death. I'm a psychic. So any type of death, suicide, homicide, massacre, God forbid, if somebody died in the master bedroom, okay, well, the primary bedroom now, is that something that would have to be disclosed to the prospective buyer? I mean, would you want to know if somebody died in the property before you purchase? Would it be a deal breaker for you? It wouldn't? Okay. Is that something that's material and should be disclosed to the prospective buyer? Federal law says no. Any type of death does not have to be disclosed. There's a famous story about this that was turned into multiple movies. There's a property in Long Island, if I'm not mistaken, Amityville Horror. I don't know if you've seen this movie. Yeah. Where each owner mysteriously died, but they found out that the neighbor was poisoning. Anyhow, that property is actually, it's in existence and somebody lives in that property today. And it's a beautiful property, by the way. And they had to change the address with the city because people kept on hopping their fence and taking photos in front of their house and all this stuff because of that horrific past. But that's not something that had to be disclosed to the prospective buyer. Isn't that interesting? So what if somebody comes up to you? This is the next question you have. So what if somebody asks you, right? They come up to you in the middle of the house or in the middle of the property tour and they say, I got this weird feeling when I got into that room. Man, my hair stood up on end. I got goosebumps and I had this weird energy. Did somebody die in there? What do you do in that circumstance? Now, deal honestly and fairly. The second duty that you're obligated to, I'm not telling you to lie, but federal law also says you do not have to disclose. So how do you handle that circumstance? Could you be the agent that says, I suggest you do your own research? Yes, you can. And you won't be in violation. If that's relevant to you, if you think that's pertinent to making a decision, then you can do your own research. And then let me know if you want to proceed. You can be that agent. Up to you. Yes.
All right, but the federal law says that you don't have to disclose, but can you
Yes.
want to disclose?
Yes. Yeah. Good luck. Good luck with that. Hey, by the way, somebody died in the primary bed. Don't worry about it. We got all that stench out and those stains, we'll have it removed by the closing day. Don't worry.
Hey, like for inherited
Uh-huh.
property and he in that house.
Uh-huh.
He said it's horrific.
Okay.
Trying to sell it back
Yeah.
but he disclosed that to me, not that doesn't matter.
You don't have to disclose.
But he told me on his own that, yeah, my brother.
That's a really nice gesture, but
So I guess you could keep it kind of vague, because you don't wanna say like, no, nothing happened, and then they do their research.
la 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 la. Okay, you said keep it kind of vague. I don't want to tell you to mislead people. Okay, that's not my position. I'm just telling you the facts. Federal law says you do not have to disclose. I'll leave that in your hands, okay? So you don't have to disclose. Even if they ask you, you say if that's relevant to you, you could do your own research. And just keep it simple. Give them a website link if they want to do research or something. I don't know. But you don't have to disclose. That's the major point. Now, the second relationship, probably the most important out of the three because it's so common. It's the most common. It's the transaction broker relationship. And as a transaction broker, you're recognized as a facilitator. So you're facilitating between two parties. You're a transaction broker. You're brokering. You remember this word is reoccurring once again. So you're facilitating in the transaction. Does that make sense? And there is representation in this relationship, which means you can negotiate in the transaction. But you can actually represent both sides, prospective buyer and prospective seller in the same transaction, and make a commish off of both sides. But you might have a question as to how you remain what within the transaction. Look, I wrote it down, neutral. They describe it in the textbook as being limited representation. How do you exercise limited representation within that transaction between the parties that you're facilitating for? First of all, it might be where you're representing a prospective buyer and a prospective seller, but then when it comes to negotiation, both parties have adverse interests. The seller wants the most money possible. The buyer wants to get the best price they can. So how do you remain neutral in an ethical fashion as a transaction broker, even though you're allowed to represent both sides? You'll see it within the duties that are presented for this specific relationship. We're going to add 4 more. So in addition to the 3 I already mentioned, we're going to add 4 more. Use skill, care, and diligence within the transaction. And this is how you remain neutral right here. Present all offers, counter offers in a timely manner, explaining the details of each to the buyer and or seller. So for instance, if you're working with the seller and a buyer in the transaction as a transaction broker, and the buyer wants to make an offer, you prepare the offer, you submit it to the seller, explain the details. If the seller doesn't like it, maybe they want to submit a what type of offer back to the buyer? Counter offer. You prepare it, submit it, explain the details, and you repeat this process until they can reach a what? An agreement. That's how you remain neutral. Present offers and information and keep it as simple as that. Any questions about this? Now, I'm not telling you that you only select this relationship when you have a seller and a buyer sitting in front of you at the same time saying, we both want you to represent us. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you that you can start with representing the seller as a transaction broker, list their property for them. And if you just so happen to find a prospective buyer that doesn't have representation, well, the door is wide open. You can also represent them, bring these two parties together, negotiate, and make a commish off of both sides. What's better than this relationship? Why would you select a relationship other than this if you have a choice? Does that make sense? But once again, you must remain neutral. Well, other states, they might describe it in a different way. They might call it a dual agency and so forth. But there's specific documentation that would have to be signed, depending on the state it is, to allow it. We call dual agency, we describe dual agency in a different way in the state of Florida. But in Florida, we do have something called a transaction broker that can facilitate for both sides ethically by remaining what? Neutral, impartial in the transaction. And how do you do that? Once again, present offers and information to each side until they can reach an agreement. And it's as simple as that. Now, let's move on to the single agent relationship. And the single agent relationship is just like it sounds. You're single. You're going to choose one side. There is representation here. But for one side, it's one-sided. Buyer or seller, not both. And whatever side you choose, you're going to represent them fiduciarily. Do you remember this word? What does the word fiduciary mean? You're dealing in what with one another? Alliance, trust, confidence with one another. So whatever side you select, you have alliance with them, obedience with them. Look at the duties within this relationship. Think of the acronym COLD will help you remember. Complete confidentiality, obedience, loyalty, and anything you know that will benefit them within the transaction, full disclosure. That side that you choose and that side alone. Any questions on this? Okay. As you can imagine, this is not common, being a single agent, choosing one side specifically. The most beneficial relationship naturally is what? Yeah, because then you'll have the ability to represent what? And make what off of both sides? Commish off of both sides. What's better than this? If you have that ability, why wouldn't you select the transaction broker relationship to proceed with? But you might not have a choice, depending on the circumstance, as to what relationship you select. Now, what your textbook will tell you is you should lean on your broker. And the employing broker should inform you as to what relationship you should select, which one is most appropriate, depending on the circumstance. But I'll give you an example of when you would, in my opinion, I think it would be imperative for you to select the single agent relationship versus the others. If you're working with a family member or your best friend and you're listing their property, I would tell you to ethically to choose the single agent relationship because of that existing relationship, that loyalty that you have to your friend or family member. I think it would be unethical to choose otherwise. Let's just say you have a prospective buyer that comes into an open house. Have you ever seen an open house that real estate agents host to try to get buyers to come through the front door? Let's just say you do have a serious buyer that comes through the front door and they're not represented, but you're listing your mother's house. Would it be ethical for you to also represent that buyer? Knowing that it's your mother, you're probably going to look out for her best interests versus the other side. I would suggest that you either be a no broker, where you could just take care of the paperwork, or tell them to get their own representation from another brokerage company. And why would I give them the opportunity to proceed with a no brokerage relationship? Remember the details of the no brokerage relationship. You're simply just taking care of the what? Paperwork. Are you representing them if you're just taking care of the paperwork? No. It's a non-representation relationship. So since you already have loyalty, obedience, the single agent relationship with one side, the only other way that you can work with the other side is with the no brokerage relationship, because you're not representing them if that's the case. Are you with me on that? Okay. Let's move on. I'm going to test you based on what we just learned. But let's move on to the next page. Under the single agent relationship, focus on the shaded box. Fiduciary, non-fiduciary relationships. Look, transaction broker, the no brokerage relationship. Does fiduciary exist? As stated in the shaded box, no. So for that reason, the individual that you're working with, the individual you're working with is referred to as a what? Starts with a C. Customer, yes. There's only one relationship, look up here, where fiduciary exists. It's the what relationship? Single agency. And for that reason, that buyer or seller, whatever side you select, not both, one side, right? They're called a what? Principal. Any questions on this? Why is knowing this important? Because in your question, if they use the term principal, you know they can only be talking about one relationship, the single agent relationship. So that should help you eliminate some other selections that they might try to provide to you. All right, now let's talk about something called dual agency. Dual agency. Have you ever seen a spy movie before? Spy movie? You know what a double agent is in a spy movie? What is a double agent doing in a spy movie? They're playing what? Both sides to benefit themselves or a third party, some mystery person. It's the same thing in real estate. Hence the name, dual agent, that's double, right? Double agent. So how are you classified as a double agent in our business, which by the way is illegal? It's where you try to represent both sides fiduciarily. I'm going to repeat that. It's where you try to represent the prospective buyer and prospective seller fiduciarily. What does the word fiduciary mean? You have what with one another? Alliance with one another. There's only one relationship out of the three where alliance fiduciary exists. Which one is it? We just got done describing it. Single agent. So isn't that what's described for us right here? It's where a brokerage firm represents as a fiduciary single agent relationship with both buyer and seller in the same what? Same what? Transaction. It's illegal in Florida, guys. So then you're probably thinking, well, what about the transaction broker relationship? Why is that one not illegal? Because in the transaction broker relationship, fiduciary does not exist. Remember, as a transaction broker, you are what? Neutral. You don't have fiduciary with either side. You are impartial in the transaction. Does that make sense? So if you try to have a single agent relationship with both sides, fiduciary relationship with both sides, that's where the conflict lies. And that's when it becomes an illegal dual agency. Any questions about this? All right, let me test you. You tell me what you think about it. I'll put it in the margin here. I'm going to give you different combinations of relationships. You tell me if they can or cannot work together in the same transaction for the same brokerage company. Okay, I'll show you. Let's say you have a no brokerage relationship with both sides. Is that acceptable in our business for you to be a no broker for both sides? Simply take care of the what for both sides? I'm reviewing, yes, paperwork. Is that acceptable? Yeah, that's acceptable. Answer is yes. All right, what about a no brokerage relationship with one side and a transaction broker relationship with the other side? Is that combination acceptable? Neutral with one side, transaction broker, and just taking care of the paperwork for the other side. Is that okay? Yes, the answer is yes. What about a transaction broker relationship with both sides? Is that acceptable? Yes, being neutral for both sides. And remember, that's the essence of what the transaction broker relationship is all about, or at least why it's so beneficial, is because you can represent both sides as a transaction broker, make a commission off of both sides. So the answer is yes. What about a transaction broker for one side and a single agent relationship for the other side? If you already have loyalty, obedience, fiduciary with one side, can you have any form of representation with the other side? No. And we know transaction broker has representation, so no, it's unacceptable. What about a single agent relationship for both sides? You tell me. No. As we just got done describing, it's an illegal what? Dual agency. You remember that? It's right there on line 11. Okay, what about a single agent relationship for one side and a no brokerage relationship for the other side? Is that combination acceptable? The answer is yes. Because look up here. If you already have a single agent relationship with one side, fiduciary with one side, the only other way that you can assist the other side is with the what relationship? No brokerage, just taking care of the what for them. And that's it. No representation. And you got to let them know, by the way, if you try to accomplish this. If you already have single with one side, and then this party comes in that needs you to prepare the contract for them, just let them know, I'm not representing you. I'm not looking out for your best interest. I'm looking out for this side to make it clear. Any questions? I mean, our very own Melissa mentioned she didn't use a real estate professional. You might want to ask her. Your fellow classmate. It's a preference. Maybe she didn't want to deal with, I don't know, going backwards and forwards with a middle person, and she wanted to deal directly with the individual that's selling the property.
Got a cheaper price on it so that they didn't have to use a realtor to pay for it.
There you go.
Because he didn't want to split the commission. He didn't want to split the commission with the realtor.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Let me give you one other feature of the transaction broker relationship that is important for you to know. It's at the bottom of page 73, line 18. Even though there's 3 relationships and you can select any one of those 3, the most common and the one that's assumed in the state of Florida is the what relationship? Transaction broker relationship. And that's great because it's probably the relationship you're going to select anyway. Why wouldn't you want to represent both sides and make a commission off of both sides? At least have the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, if you choose one of those other relationships, you close that door, right? If you choose single, you're stuck with that one side. Any questions on this? So if you don't specify what type of relationship you're going to proceed with, it's automatically assumed in the state of Florida, you are a what? Transaction broker. That's key, and you're going to be tested on that. Now, this confirms what we already know, page 74. Class exam question. We discussed the details, the duties of the transaction broker relationship, but it is something you will be tested on, so you can highlight accordingly. Okay. Let's take, let me see. Let me see. We don't have much left within this unit, but let's take a break. Let's just take a quick 10-minute break. A little bit more than 10 minutes. Be back at 6:20. Then we'll continue where we left off.
Michael, we can't hear you.
Testing, testing. You hear me? All right, cool. All right, so once again, let me paint the picture. You have a single agent relationship with the seller and a single agent relationship with the buyer. Can you bring these two parties together within the same transaction? Yes or no? The answer is no. That's an illegal what? Dual agency. Perfect. Let's change the circumstance based on what Darlene was describing. You're representing the seller as a single agent for ABC Realty, and your coworker is representing the buyer as a single agent, same brokerage company. Now, can you bring these two parties together, complete the transaction? Is that acceptable? The answer is absolutely not, because you have to, I need to make something very clear. The relationship that exists with that buyer or seller does not exist with you and that buyer or seller. The representation comes from the brokerage company. You do not represent them as a sales associate. You're doing all the work and you're reaping the rewards of that. You receive a percentage of commission based off of that, but representation is not with you. It's with the brokerage firm. Does that make sense? Therefore, any money that's made off of that buyer and or seller is whose money? It's not your money. It's the what? It's the brokerage's money. And you receive a split of that for doing all of this work. So essentially what I'm describing to you is, even if it's you and your coworker and you're thinking it's separate, no, you're working for the same what? Brokerage company. And the relationship is with the brokerage. So it's like the brokerage company has a single agent relationship with both sides. And that's still an illegal what? Dual agency. That's why it's illegal, unacceptable. Okay, what about a single agent relationship with ABC Realty and the other party has a single agent relationship with XYZ Realty? Two different brokerage companies. Is that okay? Yeah, there's no conflict. However, who wants to outsource their clients and not want to complete that transaction in-house? So the question I have for you is, if you start with a single agent relationship, could you switch? And which relationship would you switch to best accommodate what you're trying to accomplish? The transaction broker relationship. So the question I have for you is, follow-up question, why wouldn't you select that relationship from the very beginning to avoid this situation completely? Start with the transaction broker relationship and there's no conflict. Complete the deal in-house. You understand what I'm saying? No, I'm saying you should start with a transaction broker relationship. But if you don't, if you're single agent, you have the single agent relationship and you want to switch, can you do so? Yes, you can. But there's only one document that must be signed. You can't do this verbally. You have to get them to sign one specific document to switch. To gain the principal's written consent to change the relationship, buyer and seller both must sign. It's called the consent to transition to transaction broker form. And this is the only document that if you say it out loud, it has a natural rhythm to it. And that natural rhythm will help us recall this information for exam purposes. It's called the consent to transition to transaction broker form. Try to say it. You can't do it without a rhythm. Consent to transition to transaction broker. So that will help you remember this when it comes time to taking your exams. And we're going to repeat this once again. It's the consent to transition to transaction broker form. Yeah, man. And let's break it down because the name itself makes sense if you break it down. We have consent. What is consent? Getting permission, right? To transition. That means to what? To switch, to change, to what relationship? The transaction broker relationship. And it's just that simple. Any questions about this? Once you get this document signed, you switch to the transaction broker relationship, and therefore there is no conflict. Does that make sense? But once again, the advice is choose the transaction broker relationship from the very beginning, and you don't have to deal with that. All right. What we see on the next page, brokerage relationship limitations, and what we see on this chart is what I tested you on. I tested you on the different relationships that can and cannot work together in the same transaction. You see this within the title, authorized relationships in one brokerage firm in the same transaction. The ones that can and cannot work together, essentially. Any questions about this? All right. Go to the next page, page 77. Disclosure requirements. We see Brokerage Relationship Disclosure Act. Applies to the sale of residential transactions. It requires that you disclose the relationship for which you are going to proceed with and the duties that are contained within your obligated duties. And it exists specifically for what type of transaction? We highlighted this. Residential what? Not lease. Remember, it's residential sale. How do you identify the sale of residential property? We discussed this and wrote this down specifically yesterday. We see it confirmed for us on these bullet points. It's the sale of how many units, guys? 4 units or less. Or the sale of how many acres? 10 acres or less. Any questions here? So we discussed the simple way to identify residential property is 4 units or less on 10 acres or less. And it's indirectly confirmed for us right here. Actually, I'm more so direct than not. And you'll be tested on that class exam question. The next class exam question you're going to be tested on here has to do with identifying what residential is. Do you remember we talked about this yesterday? Single family home, condo, townhouse, duplex, triplex, quadruplex. Are you with me on this? Okay. 4 units or less. And that's confirmed for us again. And we're talking about the sale of residential property. And the next class exam question says the brokerage relationship disclosure requirements do not apply to what? Well, if we're not talking about the sale of residential property, here's examples. And you'll even see it here, summarized for us in the shaded box. Any questions? They talk about non-residential. Do you remember yesterday when I said most of the laws were established to protect people that are buying property to live in, which is what type of property? Residential. And I also mentioned, following that if we're not talking about residential, the same rules do not what? Here's one example of this. We're going to see several examples. The requirements don't exist when we're not talking about residential. And what disclosure are we talking about? Well, the relationship that we're entering into and all the duties that we owe within that relationship. And it talks about on page 78, the disclosure format. Says the duties, single agent relationship, non-representation must be fully described and disclosed in writing to the buyer and seller. Because the transaction broker is left out of that sentence. Why? Because a transaction broker relationship is automatically what in the state of Florida? It's assumed. So therefore, it doesn't necessarily have to be in writing and signed because it's assumed. You're already operating as a transaction broker unless otherwise agreed upon. Say if you want to choose the single agent relationship or a non-representation relationship, then it must be in what? Must be in writing, fully described in writing, signed by those parties to proceed with those 2 specific types of relationships. Now, let me ask you a question. When record keeping, how must you retain records? Do you have to get live signatures on documents nowadays? Are electronic or e-signatures acceptable in our business? The answer is yes. Technology has caught up. We're with the times. And yes, it's appropriate. It's acceptable for you to do so. And that's how our business is done. When I started in real estate, I had to chase people down for signatures. I had to schedule to meet them at a Panera Bread on the corner or whatever the case may be just to get a signature, or else the deal falls apart. But now I can get them to sign with their finger on their flipping cell phone from anywhere on the planet. And that's how we like to do business. That's more efficient. And let's operate efficiently, correct? Use these tools, they're available. Now, once again, this confirms what we just highlighted. For the no brokerage relationship, also known as the non-representation relationship, and single, they have to be in writing and signed. But transaction broker is what in the state of Florida? It's presumed or assumed that all licensees operate as transaction brokers. Any questions on this? And if you're switching relationships from single agency to transaction broker, here's the document. Once again, it's just reviewing. You'll see a lot of this in the textbook. Repetition, revealing the information to you multiple times throughout the unit so you can connect some dots. But that's what I'm here for. So anyhow, this document, you can't switch verbally. You have to get it in writing and sign. We talked about record keeping, but how long must you retain records for as a brokerage firm? Look, I highlighted line 33, 5 years. Moving forward, something consistent that you can rely on. When it comes to record keeping, it's always in real estate. How many years? Yeah. IRS is what? How many years? 3 years. IRS is 3 years. Like retaining documentation for your business because they can audit you up to 3 years prior. Real estate is always what? 5 years. Any questions? Okay. On the next page, they just give you examples of what these documents, disclosures might look like. So you can continue on to page 80. And let me review something with you guys just from personal experience. You might be curious as to when somebody would insist to choose one relationship versus another. Imagine if somebody says, I want to use a single agent relationship. What do you do in that circumstance when you know in the back of your mind you want to persuade them to choose what relationship? Transaction broker, because it's more beneficial to you. In my illustrious career, I've only had maybe less than a handful of circumstances where somebody insisted. And this is when somebody reads something online or, I don't know, watches a short form video or something like that, YouTube video, and they want to come to the table with some ammunition. And they're thinking, okay, well, I just learned about the single agent relationship from this person on YouTube, and they said loyalty, obedience. I'm going to make sure I ask my agent for that because it sounds more beneficial to me. But they don't know the nuance of that relationship and the limitations in that relationship. And that's what we exist for, to reveal that to them and to persuade them otherwise. The average person does not know, but I'll tell you about the circumstances where somebody insisted. I want to use a single agent relationship. If that's information they bring to me, I'll ask them to explain why we should choose a single agent relationship versus the transaction broker relationship. I'll put them on the spot and I'll just wait until things get real awkward, because for the life of them, they'll probably not be able to cite enough knowledge about it to fight for it. And then I'll step in and say, hey, listen, I applaud you for doing this research. I'm proud that you did that before we had this meeting, but let me explain why we should choose a transaction broker relationship, because you're the expert, right? And you're going to provide that knowledge to them and you can persuade them easily otherwise. If they're still insisting, I'll create a scenario to help better illustrate why we should choose the transaction broker relationship and highlight the limitations of using the single agent relationship. Okay, we could choose the single agent relationship, but let me tell you how this might work. Imagine I list your home as a single agent, and then we have an open house. A buyer walks through the front door. They want to move forward with purchasing your property. But because I have a single agent relationship with you, I cannot represent them, even if they want to offer full asking price and move forward with your property. Does that sound like something that you would want, that you would desire, that circumstance? They'll be like, hell to the no. Of course, I want you to help them out and facilitate the deal. If they're going to offer full asking price, it's what they want, right? So then you highlight once again, well, if we choose the single agent relationship, that circumstance cannot exist because I have loyalty, obedience, full representation with you. I cannot represent them. So you just told me that's not something that you want. Well, let's choose the transaction broker relationship, and here is why. And if they're still fighting for it, then there's one left rabbit in the hat that you can pull out. You can tell them this, and this is going deep into the legal aspect of the single agent relationship. We know there's only one relationship where fiduciary exists. Which one is it? The single agent relationship. So if that one is selected, legally speaking, if fiduciary is present, I have alliance with you and you have alliance with me. And that means if I cause loss or harm to somebody within the real estate transaction, you're actually going to take responsibility for my actions because fiduciary exists between you and I. And they're going to change their tune real quick. They're going to think, hell to the no, I'm not going to take responsibility for your actions. You're the professional, not me. Well, we chose single agency. Fiduciary exists, and you have to if that's the case. Okay, well, what's the alternative? Let's choose the transaction broker relationship. Anyhow, now, common sense will tell us, and I'm going to ask you, common sense will tell us when we should present the relationship that we're entering into, disclose, and the duties that are owed within that relationship. When do you present the disclosure of the relationship you're entering into with the buyer or seller? In the beginning, yeah. When you're signing them up, or really the common sense answer or response for this is before you start doing any work. Figure out the relationship, present the relationship duties, get them to sign, and proceed accordingly. Now, the disclosure of the relationship you're entering into is either within a listing contract. You know what a listing contract is, right? Exactly. It's a employment contract with the seller to list their property. Or it could be contained within a buyer brokerage agreement, which is what? An agreement to work with the what? The buyer. And that would outline what relationship you have with them. Does that make sense? And you should present this so that they can sign before you start doing any work. Actually, now, if you are a realtor, you are obligated to do so. Before you can show a buyer property, you have to get them to sign the brokerage representation agreement, or at least a touring agreement that says, I have representation, or you have representation from our company, and you agree to pay X percentage of compensation or whatever the flat fee is for me showing you properties. This is by rule now. That's with the big lawsuit and settlement that just went down. Anyhow. So yeah, before you start doing any work, before you list a seller's property and try to market it and spend money on advertising, figure out the relationship, get them to sign so you can proceed. Before you start driving buyers around, taking them shopping, wasting your time, your gas, and your patience, you should get them to sign the agreement, which outlines the relationship, and proceed. Any questions on this? Okay.
I have
But
a
the
question.
textbook
I'm
will
not
tell
certain if
you-
you can hear me. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes. Question,
I-
Dominique.
Yes, I have a question in regards to that form that you were just speaking in regards to, and you were talking about that flat fee or percentage. Is that negotiable by the client? Can they negotiate that percentage that they want to
Yes.
pay you? Okay,
Yep. Everything in real estate is negotiable, especially the compensation.
got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Good question. All right. So what are circumstances upon initial meeting with a buyer and or seller where it wouldn't be practical for you to whip out a contract on them and get them to sign? That's what we see. And I want to tell you the most important ones. They're right here in front of us, the four that we see on this page. If they're already working with another agent, that's the first. Then step away. Don't step on somebody else's toes. Open houses, model homes. Would it be practical for you to whip out a contract on somebody when they walk through the front door of a model home? No, it doesn't make any sense. Do you know the purpose of a model open house? What's the purpose of an open house? Bring buyers that might be interested in purchasing that property. Most people would assume that. But you would be very lucky to find a buyer that's actually interested in that specific property. Open houses serve multiple purposes. Advertising, marketing purposes. You have your name on all the signs, open house, balloons, get attention for your name and your brokerage company. But when you have a buyer, prospective buyer that walks through the front door, the first thing you tell them is to what? Sign in, put your contact information. And the question you ask them on that sign-in sheet is, are you represented? Because after looking through that property, they might not be interested in moving forward with that specific property. But the fact that they're there that day looking around means that they're out doing what? They're shopping. They're looking for property to purchase. So you're catching them at potentially a prime time. And you want to be that agent that works with them. If they check, no, I'm not represented, you want to follow up, call them and say, hey, listen, you came into this property. I know you're not interested in moving forward with this property, but what about this property attracted you on that day of the open house? Was it the location? Was it the size? Was it the school zone? Can I send you some additional options that you might be interested in? And then when you are working with this buyer, you could potentially make a commission. Does that make sense? So that's the main purpose it serves. Get buyer leads. Next is casual encounters, guys. Casual encounters. You're at a ball game or a grocery store. Are you going to whip out a contract in the middle of the produce aisle? No. And if they're asking for factual information, willingly present it without limitation, okay? Don't say, hey, listen, I'd love to tell you if the master bedroom or primary bedroom is on the first floor, but before I present that information to you, you need to sign this agreement with me. No, it doesn't make any sense. All right, let's move on. Go to the bottom of page 81. Bottom of page 81. We see designated sales associates. Do you remember earlier we talked about an illegal dual agency? And why was dual agency illegal? Once again.
Because we represent both sides, and we can't even do this fiduciary.
Fiduciary with both sides. And that only exists with what relationship? Trying to have a single agent relationship with both sides. But every time you learn a rule, there's a what to the rule? An exception. And that's what we have in front of us. In a what type of transaction? Yes. Once again, if we're not discussing residential, the same rules do not apply. And it's called designated sales associates. Why? Well, it says it's where the buyer and the seller have assets of how much? Yeah. The broker, at the request of buyer and seller, may designate what? 2 sales associates to act as what? Single agents for both sides in the same transaction. We know that in a residential transaction, that's illegal. That's a dual agency. And you'll see that reflected on the next page, line 1. But because it's non-residential, like a commercial property, like an industrial, like a warehouse, you can represent both sides. The brokerage company can have single agents for both sides, same brokerage company, and it would be acceptable. It's called designated sales associates. Any questions here? Okay. Go to page 83, and then we're going to be done with this unit. You guys got to wake up. Sluggish day. I know we have commitments outside of the real estate school. I know you have a life, but let's pump up the energy, okay? Let's get focused. Up until now, we've been talking about the various relationships, the duties within, how to enter into the relationship. Now let's talk about how to get out of the relationship. And we describe this as what starts with a T, terminating. But if you hear the word termination, most of us think of something negative. Termination in real estate is not necessarily negative. You can end nicely or not so nicely. Termination in real estate means to end. So essentially what this means is you're ending a brokerage relationship. And just like any relationship, could be nice or not so nice. All right. State exam might ask you what's the best way to end the relationship. Your answer is that first bullet point. Starts with the letter F. It's what? Fulfillment. Fulfillment means everybody got what they wanted. Buyer said they would buy, they bought it. Seller said they would sell, they sold it. We got paid our commission. We all walk away what? Happy. It's the best way to end things. But there's various ways to end the relationship. The next is mutual agreement. It's not working out for you. I know. It's not working out for me either. Let's go our separate ways. It's not you, it's me. Don't use that cliche line, but the point remains, it's mutual, both parties. Expiration, the time is expired. That's going to be detailed in your written agreement. Listing contract, buyer representation agreement. Broker walks away. They might be losing on any commissions that were due to them. Principal walks away. They might owe some money to the brokerage company. What does that mean? Well, imagine you didn't give me the full term to try to sell your property. But up until now, I spent money to market your property. So you're going to have to reimburse me advertising dollars. And that's a real thing that could be detailed in your agreement. If they terminate early, they might have to reimburse this. Okay? And the next three are very simple to get: death and destruction. If anybody dies, you can't force somebody to complete a contract from beyond the grave. And destruction of the property would terminate the relationship as well. If you're listing a seller's property, but a hurricane wipes it out, relationship is terminated. And the big B, which is what? Bankruptcy would terminate on both sides, working with a buyer or a seller. Why? Well, if the buyer is bankrupt, then they shouldn't have any money to purchase, right? If the seller is bankrupt, then they shouldn't have anything to sell. So that would terminate the relationship. Any questions here? Okay. We're making good time. I printed out Unit 3 for you. And here's a stapler. All right, let's move on to Unit 3, and then we'll take a break in a little bit, okay? We're making good time here. Any questions so far? We good? How'd you feel about Unit 4? Tomorrow, we're going to review those three relationships once again, and understanding those three is the most important part of that unit. You're going to do your questions every single night, though. Challenge yourself, and then review is going to be something that you benefit from. Unit 3.
Question, Michael.
Yes. Question.
Just to clarify, for the three types of brokerage, that's referring to a real estate licensee, right? Not a broker.
The three types of what?
Like the three types that we just went over: transactional, single agent.
Oh, the three relationships.
Yes, that's referring to a real estate licensee, not a broker. Correct.
It's the type of relationship you have with a brokerage firm, a brokerage company.
Okay.
Because the relationship does not exist with you as an individual licensee. It exists with a brokerage company.
Okay.
And that's why if you leave that brokerage to work for another, that business that you brought to that brokerage company, it's not your business.
Mhm.
So you can't take it with you.
Okay.
It must remain with that brokerage firm. And
Okay.
therefore, any money made off of that business you brought to the brokerage company is not your money. It's the brokerage company's money. Of
Okay.
course, their employment agreement with you is to split whatever that split may be. Every brokerage company is different on the split that they get.
Okay.
But let's move on to Unit 3. Real Estate License Law Commission Rules. If you go to the bottom of page 45, who do we see once again? We see DBEPR, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. What did we write down yesterday about DBEPR? They are the Florida Licensing Authority. This is what we wrote down yesterday. That's going to be confirmed for us once again. Look on line 16. They're the agency charged with what? Licensing and regulating businesses and professionals that they issue licenses for in the state of Florida. And remember, they issue dozens of licenses, cosmetology, barbers, kickboxing, athletic agents. Go to page 46. Some general information about DeBeeper. DeBeeper has some authority. They can step in and regulate upon the public if these three circumstances are met. If the unregulated practice can harm the public, then they can step in and impose their authority. If the public is not adequately protected, or if there's no other means of restriction available. If there's no other authority available to regulate, they can use their authority. All right, another fun fact about DeBeeper Line 9, they operate under what branch of the governor? Yes, something you could be tested on. And we actually discussed this yesterday. We're going to see it again on line 11. The legislature under chapter 455 of the Florida statutes. Remember, this is the Florida statute, the Florida law that governs DeBeeper and how they operate. Also gives them authority to do the following. Highlight this. This is something you could be tested on. Investigate consumer complaints. Issue court orders when conducting investigations. Ask you to come to court. Issue cease and desist orders to unlicensed individuals. And issue citations to individuals that are licensed by DeBeeper. So if you're trying to operate as if you have a license in whatever industry, profession it is, they can shut you down. And on line 15, the chief administrator of the DeBeeper is also the what of the DeBeeper? Yeah, something you could be tested on. But who are they appointed by? Each new governor gets to choose, and their confirmation exists only with the state or Florida what? Senate. So the governor gets to choose. The chief administrator, also known as the secretary of the DeBeeper, and has to be confirmed by the state Senate. So that would be DeSantis would nominate, and then Senator, like Rick Scott. And their main office is located where? Tallahassee, which is unfortunately the capital of Florida. Hate to break it to you. Yeah, Tallahassee. It's like Albany for New York, right? Albany is the capital of New York, really? Come on, we could do better than that. Should be New York City, right? And it should be Orlando for Florida. Let's just put that out there into existence. We got Mickey. Now, you don't have to know everything on this organizational chart, but this is how the delegation of authority works. I'm just going to show you the most important divisions that we might be tested on page 47. Highlight this, line 1, division of professions. And what purpose do they serve? Right here. Regulates educational courses and license examinations for each profession under the DeBeeper. And they have the contract with Pearson VUE that handles all the testing, grading, and reporting. So they don't have to deal with maintaining software. The division of service operations. Highlight this. You'll see right here. Their central intake unit processes all license what? And fees. Yep. So when you submit your application on myfloridalicense.com, I know a lot of you already scheduled to get your fingerprints done. Great. That link is in your account on your dashboard. Go ahead and click on it, pay for it, schedule it, get your fingerprints done. And next business day, submit your application, myfloridalicense.com. That's also on the handout, the flyer that's in your folder. Let's move down to line 27, Division of Real Estate, which we described briefly yesterday. We call him DRE for short. And DRE provides all services required to administer Florida real estate license law. But what we saw yesterday was that they provide support services to the FREC and DeBeeper. And what support services? Well, here's one of them. but they also handle processing real estate license applications. And we describe this, look at it. It says routine duties, clerical functions, ministerial duties. That sounds like they're pencil pushers to me, right? They're behind a desk, they're processing paperwork. That's their duty, division of real estate. And it's the division for our profession, our license. If you're trying to get a geologist license through DeBeeper, because that's one of the licenses they issue, they have their division of geology that handles all things geology. This is for us. Now, conveniently, they're located where? Orlando, which is nice. And it's interesting because this is where the Florida Real Estate Commission meets once a month. And this is where their meetings are hosted in the headquarters for the Division of Real Estate, which is downtown Orlando. And they're open to the public, right? If you attend this meeting and you have a license, you sign in with your license number, how many hours credit can you get towards your continuing education? 3 hours is what we described yesterday. But let's talk about Florida Real Estate Commission once again, FREC. When was FREC established? 19 what? 25. Yes, good job, Elijah. So we know in 1923, the law was established. Law first, then FREC to enforce it. And we can think of them as police for Florida real estate license law. Their purpose is to protect the general public. But how do they do it? By regulating all of us, real estate licensees in Florida. You can thank FREC for the fact that you only have to take a 63-hour class to get a Florida real estate license. Check this out. Foster the education of real estate licensees and permit holders. Other states, listen, you have it easy in the state of Florida. A lot of states are about 60 hours, several. But New York is 75. California is 135. Texas is 180 hours to get your real estate license. I don't know what it is in Virginia. I think it's pretty comparable. Okay. So here in Florida, 63 hours. That's a piece of cake, right? So you should be thankful for FREC that it's so little hours. Let's talk about what FREC is composed of, because I mentioned to you I put my name in for consideration to be one of these FREC members. And you're probably thinking, man, it's got to be a huge department, right? To take on the responsibility of regulation of tens of thousands of real estate licensees throughout the entire state of Florida, but it's to the contrary. It's how many total members? 7 members of FREC. We found some way to make it work with 7. But depending on what state it is, every state has their own number of commissioners. Florida real estate commissioners. North Carolina is 9. Texas is like 12. But here in Florida, we found some way to make it work with only 7. So that's a whole lot of responsibility that's delegated to them, at least at face value. But what you'll find out is that FREC only sees the most severe penalties, violations of real estate license law. They don't see the small stuff. So that's why 7 members is all that's needed to handle this regulation of real estate license law. It trickles down to DeBeeper. It filters out depending on how severe. And that's what takes place during their monthly meetings, addressing the most severe penalties, violations, complaints, and so forth. Let's see how they're broken down, what they consist of. 4 of them are active what? Who have been licensed for at least how many years? Yes. So I would fall in that category. 1 of them is an active broker or sales associate who have been licensed for at least how many years? 2 of them are consumer members, people who have never had a real estate what? Of course, that's a good opinion to have. The average consumer's opinion. That's why they're included. And at least 1 has to be held. Yeah, a little seniority, right? Somebody who's been around, who's seen changes in the market. And that's a good perspective, POV, to have. Let's move on. Who gets to select each commissioner, each new governor? But the nomination has to be confirmed by the what? The Florida Senate. And how long of a term can the commissioner serve? Look on line 23. Yes, 4-year staggered terms. What does that mean? That means 4 years on, 4 years off, 4 years on, 4 years off, as many times. But check this out on the next page, page 49. Commissioners may not serve more than how many consecutive back-to-back 4-year terms? Yeah. And this is easy for us to remember. Why? Because each new governor gets to choose their own commissioners. And how long is the governor's term? And how many consecutive 4-year terms can a governor serve? Same. And it makes sense because each new governor gets to select. Now, this is a thankless job that I put my name in for consideration. Thankless job. Why? Because commissioners do not receive a what? Instead of a salary, they receive how much per day? Wow, thanks, DeSantis. $50 per diem went on official business, but how often do they meet? They only meet once a month, so $50 once a month. Really? And they also receive reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses such as travel accommodations and meals, not Disney tickets, because meetings are in Orlando. We already know how often they meet. Look on line 10. Each what? In the headquarters for the Division of Real Estate, which is located where? Orlando, Florida. Any questions here?
So why would someone want to?
Right.
Yeah, like,
Because I've been doing this long enough that I know changes that need to get made in our business. And I want to be the pioneer of those changes. At least have a voice for those changes. And some things are going to might be tough to swallow, but I think it's for the greater good. So just taking on a leadership position so you can have a voice, I think is important. Is it going to bring me more business? No. I mean, and you're not compensated much. I mentioned it's a thankless job. If I put it on a business card and I hand you that business card, the average buyer or seller, do they know who the Florida Real Estate Commission is? You think that they're going to hire me just because I'm a FREC member? No. So I hand them the business card and I'm going to wait for like this amazing reaction. I'll be waiting a long time, right? Oh, by the way, on the business card, I don't know if you saw that I'm a Florida Real Estate Commissioner. Yeah. And then they're going to be like, okay, good for you. Okay. What does that mean? Oh, it just means so-and-so. Oh, okay. Wow, good for you. Yeah. Awesome. It's not going to bring me more business, I don't think, but it's a good resume booster, I guess. And you want to make change. This is how you do it. Commissions, general powers and duties. We'll discuss this and then we'll take a break. They're divided into 3 areas of responsibility. Line 19, you'll see that. And the first on line 20 is what? Executive authority, executive power. This essentially means, and we actually wrote this down yesterday, that they have control over your what? License. You remember that? They have authority, control over your license. That's what we discussed. And that falls under this executive authority. Which means what? Well, they make the educational requirements for you to get a license and to keep your license renewal. Adopt a seal doesn't mean they adopt a baby seal from SeaWorld. Okay? Adopt a seal means if they have to make a final decision on any license matter, they use a seal that represents all of their signatures. It's an official FREC stamp to serve as prima facie evidence. We talked about prima facie, good and sufficient on its face, unit 2. And they establish fees. So if you don't comply with making those fees, then they don't have to give you a license or renew your license. If you go to the next page, we see quasi what? Quasi-legislative. What does that word quasi mean? Quasi. Not Quasimodo. Okay? Quasi is kind of, sort of, almost. And legislative means they can make laws. So put that together. What can they do? They can kind of make laws. Well, what does that mean? They can kind of make laws. Remember, The laws that they establish are not criminal laws. They're license laws, which are also referred to as what? Starts with an A. What type of law? Administrative law. So FREC is limited to only making and enforcing administrative law. The extent of their authority does not go beyond that. They can't enforce criminal law. So it's only license matters that they can regulate upon. And you'll see evidence of that. They create and pass rules and regulations, bylaws. There's a term used to describe the creation of these license laws. It's to promulgate. You'll see this for your homework tonight. Promulgate means to enact. And they regulate professional practices based on the law, those laws. We'll talk more about that in Unit 6. Then we come across quasi what? Judicial. What does quasi mean? Kind of. And judicial means they can judge you. I'm just simplifying it. So put it together, they can kind of judge you. What does that mean? When it comes to enforcement of these kind of laws, the license laws that they create, how can they impose authority? Well, they can grant or deny license applications. Okay. They can suspend, revoke what? Yes, and impose what types of fines? Administrative means a license fines. And they can make determinations as it pertains to your license. They only have control of your license. That falls under executive authority. And this is the level of enforcement that they have. All right, let's take a break. I want you guys to be back at 7:20. 7:20. Got a little bit more than 10 minutes. Stretch out. Do what you got to do.
Hi, my name is Crystal Rivera, and I'm a realtor with Live Realty at Nona. I decided to be a real estate agent for my love of helping others, thinking about helping them with their first home, with their first apartment, with their first investment property. Flipping homes is what started me in the business. My husband is into flipping homes, so I went from nursing, which I'm still currently doing, but now going into real estate. Decided to use Cameron Academy because of my nursing schedule and how their schedule works well with my schedule. Did not expect to be prepared as I was. Michael was amazing. He prepared me in 2 weeks to take the test, literally 5 days after I completed the class. And 3 days after that, I was already signed with Live Realty. And here we are 5 weeks later, and I have my first listing. So definitely prepared me well for the real estate industry and just all that's to come. I'm excited, and I wish everybody luck.
Hey, my name's Jonathan Gibson. I am from Orlando, Florida. I had started my career in real estate based on wanting to I started out my journey in real estate with Cameron Academy because I read a lot of online reviews and there were exceptional reviews about Cameron. When I got here, I wasn't disappointed at all. I realized Michael was the best teacher and he helped me learn everything I needed to know about real estate. And he's a very good instructor. He's thorough. He tells everything. He's one of the better professors. He's good at explaining stuff, helping you get through this and making it easy for everything. And I wanted to do real estate because I read some books and I bought homes and I wanted to start renting out my property. And I know we had, based on my research online from Google and everything, I knew I had to do a school for Florida and do the 63-hour course. And I looked it up, came to Cameron Academy. It's been the best thing ever. He's helped us with connections. He's brought in different realtors and brokers, plus find work after the academy. So if you're wanting to learn anything about real estate, I would definitely recommend Cameron Academy.
Hi, my name is Tamara Fletcher, and I have experience in education. I've worked in education for over 17 years, but I always wanted to get into real estate. I wanted to get into real estate because I love a couple of things. I love people, I love making money, and I love being able to sell homes, or at least the potential of selling homes. I love real estate. That's what brought me to Cameron Academy. Cameron Academy has done so much for me. I have learned so much from Michael. The information that I've gained here has made me feel so prepared for the state exam as well as the exam at the end of the course. I can't go on enough about how enthusiastic Michael was during the whole process of learning and how that really made a difference in the way that I learn. Being able to be here in person and take the in-person classes is what has really made it all the difference in the world. Michael is a great instructor. I saw great reviews about him and his instruction here at Cameron Academy, and I am really happy to say that all of those positive reviews are true, 1,000%. It's made a world of difference for me, and if I could do it again, I would.
My name is Gabriel Minyarji. I've been in the restaurant industry for the past 25 years, now getting the residential investment opportunity. I found Cameron Academy to be very helpful in my new endeavor. Michael Cameron has been very, very helpful, knowledgeable, provided very new and efficient information to help me endeavor my career. I'm very, very pleased and satisfied that I found Cameron Academy and the knowledge that I gained from them and for all my future endeavors. I highly, highly, highly recommend them. I definitely give them a 5-star plus.
My name is Dennis Duen. I came to the Cameron Academy. My mentor, he also he told me go directly to Cameron Academy. They are very, very good. And that's how he got his license. And he advised me to go to that school. And when I came, so far, it was the best decision that I made. The instructor Michael was very, very good. He's very good and it would benefit me, very knowledgeable. So I want to say thank you to him. And I think I will pass because of him. I will pass both school exam and the state exam. So it was the best decision that I made. Michael was very good and I want to say thank you to him. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Samuel Ramirez. I'm an electrician. I got into real estate to get into my own deals and to see if I can sell some real estate for commission on the sides. Cameron Academy taught me a lot of things. It taught me different things that I didn't know about real estate. It cleared up some misconceptions that I had. Michael was a great teacher. He taught me a lot about real estate that I didn't know, and it just opened my eyes a lot more and made me just very motivated to get into this. And I think anyone should go to Cameron Academy.
Mi nombre es Rolly Peralta y acabo de terminar las clases aquí en la Academia Cameron con el profesor Michael. He aprendido mucho y estoy muy agradecido con Michael por todo lo que me ha enseñado. Yo quiero ser un real estate agent para seguir invirtiendo en el futuro y también ayudar a algunas familias a adquirir sus sueños. Estoy muy agradecido con Michael y invito a todas las personas a venir a esta academia.
大家好，我叫 Rudy 我很开心能够跟 Michael 上学，因为他在real estate 这方面学到了给我很多知识，我也很开心能够选到他，因为不是每个人都可以教你，他能够教你的东西，他有很多的实力，有很多的经验，而且很风趣，所以对于我来讲是一件非常幸运的事情。那我个人想做房地产投资，所以我必须要有最专业的知识去帮助我自己。很幸运的能够选到 Michael， 所以我希望大家以后能够给他一个机会去跟他做投资，不会让你丢钱，这个很重要。所以祝你们好运，希望能以后见到你们，谢谢，拜拜。
Go to page 51. I love that awkward transition, turning the music off completely. Only $450,000, period. A similar property just sold for $650,000, but was basically a tear down, period. Sorry. All right, page 51, we see license renewal, license statuses. We're going to change gears and talk about something a little bit different here, specifically your license statuses and renewal periods that is so important for you to be familiar with. And no matter who you are in the state of Florida, if you have a real estate license, there's only 2 expiration dates that your license could expire on. There's only 2. It's either March 31st or September what? Yeah. Now, my goal is to show you when your license would expire, and it's based on when you pass the state exam. However, before I show you the shortcut, I'm going to show you the rule. And here it is on line 8. Your initial license, actually, it's on line 7. Your initial license, what is your initial license? When you first pass the state exam, that first license that's issued to you, that license is good for at least how many months? 18 on line 8. And cannot go over how many months before you complete your renewal? Yes, 24 months, because you had a question yesterday. How long is that initial license good for? I said 18 to 24 months. And this is what I was referring to. Now, it's not just clear, cut, dry. There is some nuance to it. So let me share some examples with you, and then you can see what I'm talking about. I'll actually put the examples up here on this margin at the top. Let's rewrite those expiration dates just so we're clear on it. It's either March what? Or September what? September 30th. Let's just say you pass your state exam. I'll use my son's birthday. August 13th and the year 2024. When would this license expire? Here's the shortcut. Here's the easiest way to figure it out. You need to pay attention up here. Your expiration date has to be one of these two, right? No matter what. I mentioned that to you. No matter what, it's got to be either March 31st or September what? 30th. But out of those two options, what's the closest we can get to August 13th without going past? Out of those two options, March 31st or September 30th. Out of those two options, what's the closest we can get to August 13th without going past? It's got to be March 31st, because September is beyond, right? But of what year? 2026, 18 to 24 months. Does it fall within that time period? Yes, it does. You can always check by remembering that time period. I'll give you another example. It'll get easier every example I provide to you. Let's say you pass your state exam on my birthday. I'm still accepting gifts. November 15th in the year 2024. Out of those two options, March 31st, September 30th, what's the closest we can get to November 15th without going past? It's going to be September 30th. But of what year? 2026 again. So you see, this would be your first expiration date if you pass your state exam on this date, which means what would need to be completed prior to that expiration date, your initial expiration date? The 45-hour post-license course, right? Which is your most important renewal. I'll give you another example. Let's say you pass your state exam on September 29th, 2027. When would that license expire? I'm just giving a random date. What's the closest we can get to September 29th without going past? Exactly. Why can't we choose September 30th of 2029? Because you go over 2 years by 1 day and your license would be null and what? Void, and you have to requalify. So you have to choose March 31st and of what year? 2029. And the last example, let's say you pass your state exam on my other son's birthday, March 6th. March 6th. And the year, let's say 2025, because that's coming up. What expiration date would we select? What's the closest we can get to March 6th without going past? It would be September 30th of 2026. Why? Well, if you chose 2027, you'd go over 2 years. Add it up, you'll find out. And that's why if you add this up, you'll find out it falls within that time range, 18 to 24 months for your first renewal. And you can always rely on that rule to help guide you towards the correct answer. But once again, just so we can be clear on this, what class would have to be completed between the time you pass your state exam and your first expiration? Your post. Okay, just to make sure you're paying attention, what would be your next expiration date? Right here. What would be your next expiration date? Now your license expires every 2 years on the same date. So what's exactly 2 years later? September 30th, and of what year? 2028. And the next expiration? September 30th, 2030. It's kind of crazy to see that. But anyhow, and it's not too far away. So take a look. What class would have to be completed for each of these? Your CE, which stands for what? Continuing education. And every 2 years, every 2 years, as long as you have a real estate license, you'll get your money's worth. I mean, it's less than $100 every 2 years to renew your license. And just a simple educational class with us, it's a piece of cake. Now, even though it would be wise for you to complete your education ahead of time, and what do we do when you complete the educational course with us? The school reports your hours to the state. It stays on file with them. But you haven't completely renewed your license until you pay your renewal fee. They will only accept your renewal fee during a certain time of your licensure expiration date. And I'll show you in just a moment. They will not, what I'm saying is they won't accept your renewal fee early like they would your education submitted by us. So at least your education is on file with them. You're good to go. You have peace of mind. And if all that's required to completely renew is simply pay a renewal fee, that's a credit card transaction. That's a piece of cake, less than $100. And that's every 2 years. But I'll show you the time frame in which that's done. It's right here. You see license renewal? It says 90 days before the end of the license cycle. That is confusing. Write this down instead. When do they accept your renewal fee? Within 90 days of license expiration date. Okay. So once you get within essentially 3 months of your expiration date, the state is going to send you a letter saying, hey, if you haven't already completed your education, you better go ahead and do so. You're running out of time. And then go ahead and pay your renewal fee as well. How do you submit your renewal fee? You could do it by phone, but really the best way to do it is to log into your account, the same one that you create when you submit your application. That's where you manage your license, and then you could pay your renewal fee by credit card through that online platform. It's very simple. Let's move on. What if you're late by 1 day for your first renewal? What happens? License becomes null and void. You have to requalify. But what if it's not your first renewal? Do they cut you a break is what I'm saying. The answer is yes. But you'll see it here. If you renew after the expiration date, what fee is charged? In addition, we're talking about for your CE, not your post. For your CE, they're going to change the status of your license. It says reverts automatically to what status? Not just inactive. What does it say? Involuntary inactive. Involuntary inactive is a status that reflects you being late to renew your license, completing your CE renewal. Do you think you can practice real estate while your license is involuntary inactive? Absolutely not. Can you receive commissions? No, you cannot. Until you get back on track. Well, how do you do that? Complete your CE and pay your renewal. And they're going to charge you a what fee? For being late, of course, if that's the case. You see right here, involuntary inactive status is a direct result of failing to renew specifically for your CE. It's other than the first renewal. Are you with me on that? There's only one group that receives an exception to the rule, and that's who? Military. When you're serving our country in the military, you're not required to renew your license, okay? But once you're discharged, after discharge, you have within how much time? Yep. Line 3. Simply put, any questions about this? Okay. Let's talk about active versus inactive status. Very simple. What's the only acceptable status to provide services and receive compensation? There you go. We already know that though. You need an active license. So passing the license exam is not good enough. Once you get the license, then you need to make it active. Then you can participate in real estate services, make commissions. And how do you do that? Well, finding an employer, right? Finding an employer, such as a broker or an owner developer, registering with the BPR. We already know that. We talked about it right here. But now let's talk about the two types of inactive status. You remember this one from yesterday? Voluntary. You pass your state exam, you get your license. This is going to be your status. You're voluntary. You're willingly inactive. You're basically just sitting on your license, not doing anything with it. Involuntary, what we just learned about, is when you fail to what? Look what I'm highlighting. Other than the what? First renewal. When you fail to renew on time, but other than the first renewal. Because the first renewal is the most important. You're probably wondering, okay, how long could I be involuntary inactive before I completely lose my license? Basically late to complete my CE. You'll see it here. When a license is involuntary inactive for 12 months or what? Yes. What do they make you complete to get back on track? 14 hours, you pay a renewal fee, and they charge you a what fee? A late fee. What if you're over 12 months late, but less than what? 2 years or 24 months? I want you to write this down. I'll simplify it for you. They double what? Everything. So what's double 14 hours? 28. They double your fees, double your late charges. But your license is not gone yet. What if you go over 2 years involuntary inactive, late? Your license becomes null and what? And you must requalify. That's plenty of time, right? Within 2 years initially to be in compliance, and then an additional 2 years late. Wow. So they really have, the DBPRA has really tough skin. Okay. They've heard every excuse under the sun. There's only one exception. You remember we talked about this exception? If you have a physical or what? Or economic what? Hardship. And that's what you see here. Reinstatement of a null and void license. And you'll see it right here on line 8. If you can prove physical or economic hardship, they might give you a break. Give you a little bit more time. But there's limitations, as you can imagine. We talked about this already in Unit 2. Let's continue on. When would your license be null and void? Well, there's several examples. It's on these bullet points. The first one is when you're more than 2 years involuntary inactive. We just discussed that. The next is when your license is revoked. You see that? And this is due to disciplinary action. And guess what? Revocation is a what type of penalty? Permanent. That means you can never get a license again in the state of Florida. What about another state? That's a question I always get. Yes, but do you think it could jeopardize you from getting a license somewhere else? Yeah. It could be on a number of circumstances. But yes, it could be where you're illegally operating as a dual agent within a real estate transaction. That could be an example.
Who reports that?
Somebody that recognizes it as a violation of real estate license law. And we'll talk about this in Unit 6, how you submit complaints against licensees. Your fellow licensees that you see is doing something unethical, something illegal. Unethical really has to do with like the code of ethics through the Realtor Association, if they're a realtor. And then illegal, we're talking about Chapter 475, Chapter 455, and so forth. What if you're late by 1 day for your first renewal? Failure to complete your post, null and void, yep. And then If you voluntarily give up your license, they call it relinquishment or canceling your license. Like somebody who is what from the business? Look, I'm highlighting retiring, wants to give their license back to the state. Look on line 28, cancellation does not involve disciplinary action. We'll talk more about this in a later unit. No, most people wait for the license to what? Expire. But if you want to do it the right way, if you're no longer going to practice, you give your license back to the state because you don't want anything popping up. You know, like, hey, he was involved in this, and then you got to try to fight for your innocence and all that stuff. It's another status you should be familiar with. You could be tested on this. Cease to be in what? I want you to write this down. This is when this license status would occur. It's when you fail to notify either FREC or DeBeeper. So you can imagine when certain things change in your life, you might have to notify DeBeeper of these changes, such as change in what? Change in address, or change in what? Change in employer. This is all done online now. Okay, you could just manage your account on DeBeeper's website, myfloridalicense.com, and it doesn't cost anything to update this information. But if they find out that something did change and you didn't notify them, what status will they place you on? Cease to be enforced, not involuntary inactive. Involuntary inactive was when you fail to renew on time, right? This is when you fail to notify on time. And this says the beeper must be notified within how many days? 10 days. We'll talk about another example of this on the next page, because what you see on the next page is keeping your mailing address what with the state? Current. So what if you change your address? Must you notify the state? Yes. Is a P.O. box considered to be an acceptable address? Yes, it is. Because you're going to provide two addresses when you apply for your license. On your license application, you're going to provide two addresses. You're going to provide your residence, where you reside, where you live, and you're going to provide your mailing address. Most people receive mail where they live, so you would use the same address. But some people might want to receive mail somewhere else, and this is acceptable. Post office box. But are responsible for notifying in writing in change of mailing address, email address, place of practice. You'll see right here, DeBeeper must be notified within how many calendar days? Yep. You need to remember that time period. Otherwise, could result in how much of a citation? Look, I'm highlighting it. $1,000. Used to be $500. Now it's $1,000. Everything's been doubled. Yeah, it's true. Time period remains the same. This is going to be easy for you to remember. How do I know that you're going to remember this? Very simple. It's the same thing as your driver's what? License. If you change your physical address, you have to notify the DMV, get issued a new license that has to be done within 10 days. It's the same time period. If you get pulled over by a police officer, they're going to ask you for license and registration. And if they see that maybe you have an out-of-state tag or whatever the case may be, out-of-state address, they'll say, is this your current address? And if you say no, what's the follow-up question? How long ago? If it's anything longer than 10 days, guess what? That's about a $200 ticket. Something to remember. Let's continue on. What if you become a non-resident? Page 55. So this is not just changing your mailing address. This is moving out of the state of Florida. You're a non-resident. Remember what a Florida resident is, right? You have to notify the commission within how many days? And I assume you're probably going to change your mailing address as well, which means you would still have to update your mailing address within 10 days. But that's summarized for us in this box. Look at the shaded box. Change of residency, the commission must be notified within 60 days. And if you fail to notify, what status will they place you on? It's back on the previous page. What status for failing to notify? Cease to be in force. In addition to having that status, meaning you can't practice real estate because the only acceptable status is active, right? They're also going to impose a fine. How much of a fine? $600. Used to be $300. Any questions here? Okay. All this can be done online. I already mentioned that to you. What do we need to know? Go to the next page at the bottom, page 56, change of employer towards the bottom. If you leave the employ of one to work for another, what do you need to know? Well, any business you brought to that brokerage is whose business? It's that brokerage's that you brought it to. So can you take your listings with you? No, you cannot. Must remain. Because you have a what type of relationship with your employer? Which means trust, alliance, confidence. And guess what? Something that you might not be aware of. Fiduciary does not end with employment. So imagine if employment has been terminated or you change employers, you still have fiduciary with your previous employer. And that doesn't mean you're going to continue to bring business to your previous employer. It means you're not going to badmouth them. You're not going to slander their name. You're not going to steal trade secrets from them. You're not going to divert business away from them, like trying to steal clients and so forth. And you'll see that here on the next page as well. It says, because it's a fiduciary relationship, after leaving the employer, associates must not divert buyers and sellers from the previous or former employer. So what agents will do is they'll close out their business before they move on. So if you see like a high performing agent and all of a sudden for months, they like are not doing any business, it's probably a clear indication that they're leaving for another brokerage company. They're trying to close out their book of business because they know they can't take that business with them and they want to make all those commissions. Makes sense, right? What I talked about, confidential information, not stealing, trade secrets and so forth, that's here. Any questions about this? All right, quick question to all of you. Can you inform your buyers and sellers that you had a relationship with, that you're no longer going to work for this broker, you're working for another? Can you inform them? Yeah, it's professional courtesy, right? But can you persuade them to follow you? No, you cannot. That would be a violation of that fiduciary relationship. Let's move on. Last subject of this unit. Yes, our last subject, multiple and group licenses. Let's talk about multiple licenses first. Check this out. It's issued to a broker who qualifies as a broker for more than one business entity. And one broker can have multiple business entities. They can have a property management company. They can have a real estate sales company. They can have multiple if they wish. Brokers have the ability to do this. Associates do not. As a broker, I can be hired by another brokerage company. Maybe a brokerage company that has an office in Virginia and they want to franchise and they want to open up an office in Florida. They can hire me, even though I have my own brokerage company. I can be hired as a qualifying broker for their brokerage company. Brokers can do that. And there's no limit on the amount of offices I can have. I can have hundreds if I wish. Brokers can do that. Associates cannot. And that's what this is about. Because every location is unique, must be issued its own license by DeBeeper, and therefore I can have multiple locations, multiple licenses. Brokers can do that. Check this out. On the next page, line 4 and 5. Because associates may have only one registered employer at a time, an associate or sales associate, broker associate, may not hold multiple licenses. As an associate, you can have only the one license issued in your name, and that's it. And then you can choose to hang that license, make it active with an employer. But that's the only license you get. Are you with me on this? Not saying that you can't have licenses in other states or other occupational licenses. I'm talking about real estate specifically. All right. Group license. It's sometimes issued to associates who are employed, registered under an owner what? Do you remember an owner developer from yesterday? They're an unlicensed entity that sells, exchanges, or leases their own property. They develop it themselves and then they sell their own inventory or lease out their own inventory. We talked about that. It's an option for you to hang your license like a major home builder or like timeshare resort. You can name the timeshare resorts that exist. So an owner developer may own properties in names of various entities. For instance, like Lennar Homes. They're huge. They have development subdivisions that they construct all over the place, don't they? They don't just have one development in Central Florida. They got multiple. Lennar Homes of Winter Garden, Lennar Homes of Dr. Phillips, whatever they decide to call them. And what they do is they place it under its own LLC. But they all the LLCs operate under the parent company, the corporation, Lennar Homes International or whatever it is. And then they have all the LLCs, all the subdivisions that they're developing. Why do they do this? Put it under its own entity. Protection against liability. For instance, if there's inferior construction in one of those developments and there's a class action lawsuit by all the homeowners, they can isolate it to that one community. It doesn't affect all their other communities nor the parent company. And then also it's somewhat for tax purposes, but we're not going to get into that. But here's the thing. If all of those entities are connected, like what I mentioned to you, a parent company owns all the LLCs, all the developments, and control is with the same individual or individuals, talking about owner developer, the associate working for that owner developer may be issued a what type of license? But what's the whole purpose of getting that group license? It's right here. Highlight it. This allows the associate to sell for all of the affiliated entities of that owner developer in the state of Florida, okay? Because we know major home builders like Lennar, they're international. They build in other countries as well. But talking about your license in the state of Florida, developments for the state of Florida. So if Lennar Homes employs you, they might put you on this group license status that allows you to sell for all of those developments they have in Central Florida. Something like that. That's all it means. Any questions about this? And that's something that they have to take care of. That's not something that you have to worry about as an associate who is employed with them. They handle that registration with the state. Any questions pertaining to this? Yes.
Like what licenses? By multiple, like if they had a broker license, put someone with the broker license that doesn't exist. They can't work as a sales associate.
Okay, I'll just, because there's a couple of things to unpack there. I'll say this. When you earn the broker's license, you no longer have a sales associate license. So it supersedes, it overrides. Sales associate no longer exists. Now you're a broker. But if you don't wish to open up your own brokerage office, then you can downgrade that license to the level of a broker associate. But you still only, that's the license you have. And in that capacity, because you're not a broker, you're a broker associate, you have to follow all the rules that associates follow. So that means you can only have that one license and hang that license with one employer at any given time. Yeah, just like an associate, sales associate. But once you become a broker, you submit the form that says, now I want to open up my own office. Then you can have, it unlocks all this ability to have multiple licenses. For instance, as a broker, I have a license as a real estate broker. And then I have a license issued for my office. And then I have a license issued for the brokerage entity I created, Cameron Realty. And then if I open up additional locations, those would have their own license as well. So brokers can have multiple licenses, associates cannot. Any questions about it? And we'll talk more about this again tomorrow. Any questions about that? No? Okay, we're done with our session. Which means We're done early, aren't we? You might notice that, I mean, here's the thing. This is only something I do with the evening class. I usually try to go to the exact time for the morning class. For the evening class, does anybody have a job? Okay. Is anybody have kids? Okay. This guy. So anybody have a job and kids? Okay. Anybody have a job, kids, and is going to school? Anybody just going to school? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I know you have a life outside of the class and you're living that life prior towards taking this class, even though you might have set aside some time, you still have other obligations, parenting obligations, whatever obligations it may be. So we do small working breaks. Have you noticed that? 10, 15 minutes. So we don't do these long drawn out breaks that I would normally do with like the morning class or what you might see in another classroom environment. And plus, I like working breaks because if you take a hour long break and you go out and get a lunch and come back, you're going to come back lethargic. Okay. You're not going to want to learn anything. I want to keep the energy up and the focus locked in. So with that, you might reap some rewards. No guarantees, no promises, but for today, you're still okay. So get home safe. Yes. What are we doing tonight? At the end of units 3 and 4, you need to do the questions. The questions, it says unit quiz. It's located at the end of each unit, just like what we reviewed this morning. Lawson? Got it? Okay, all right, cool. Do these every single night, and then tomorrow we're going to review as a class. Schedule your fingerprints. Don't waste any time. Because by the end of this class, we want you to get approved. That way, you're rolling into the next thing, which is you complete the course, the hours, you take your final exam, and you're already approved to schedule your state exam. You don't want to waste any time. No longer than one week to prepare for the class exam, no longer than 2 weeks to prepare for the state exam. That's the timeline that I want you to focus on. And that's going to benefit you tremendously because the longer you wait, the more information you what? You lose the longer you wait. So you want to take your exam while you still have that ether of being in class and that energy that you're putting towards this goal. Otherwise, that energy fizzles out. Don't waste any time. Pushing your chairs, clean up your mess, drive safe. God bless. I will see you mañana.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a great night. Yes. No longer than 2 weeks. You'll find out right now, there's a lot of availability. It's slow right now. It's the time of the year. Yeah, you have to earn the certificate from us, of course. But when you go to the testing facility, that's when you bring the certificate. Yes.
Just found out today that my company Christmas party is Friday and it's like at 4.
Okay.
So would it be bad if I came in a little late or?
If you're missing the unit, you're going to have to make it up.
I don't want to miss the
Yeah.
whole thing, but
If you're missing the unit, then you might have to make it up and we'll have to play it by ear. So that's up to you. I'll leave that in your hands.
the only reason why I just want to show face because they're giving out our Christmas bonuses at that month.
Yeah. You want to stay for that. I understand. So speak with whoever is HR because you know they're going to be the ones handing out the checks. Speak with HR and say, hey, listen, is it possible? Because I have an obligation and I got to leave early.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes. Have a great night. Yes, absolutely. Pleasure to meet you. I'll see you tomorrow. All right, Hubert, good night.